Okay, everyone. So I'm just continuing this Enlightenment thinkers intro, just to give you some additional background to work with for your DBQ tomorrow. This is a description of the second treatise of civil government. That John Locke really describes the nature of man as good, and because of this, mankind or humankind can form governments. And so, governments which are formed by the people have to guarantee the rights of the people, and so on. We kind of noted some of those big takeaways that are in his particular second treatise. And some of this, note John Locke is a Christian, and he does see a particular, role for the divine. He suggests that, there is a divine allowance for freedom of will and liberty of acting. So, there is a kind of realm that people are able to make choices in, as long as it's within the bounds of the law. Okay. He also does comment on the group that was representing John Locke, talked about this a lot, the idea that he rejects kind of the Rene Descartes view that knowledge is essentially innate. He feels rather that there is a great deal of experience that people get. And so the notion of tabula rasa, the idea that there is a blank slate. Humans are kind of a blank slate, and experiences and lived experiences essentially create some of your knowledge, and you use reason, in that process. Voltaire is interesting. He is more of a figure who's literary. He writes a great deal, and that's kind of his voice. He is controversial and popular in his time period. He's French. He does become somebody who is arrested or exiled from time to time from France. He is very critical of organized religion, especially the what he described as, religious fanaticism of the Roman Catholic Church. He does write a great deal of letters. So he talks about, the English political system, for example, within the context of a letter. A lot of his letters get shared. He definitely is probably most well known for his work, Candide, which is Candide is the main character in a work where he is desperately in love, and he is led along by a professor of sorts who seems to be like the authority. But of course, this authority is somebody who is incredibly optimistic and is very much based on some other Enlightenment thinkers who really kind of fall into this optimist camp, and that everything is right. And he is going to challenge some of that. And some of the way he comes to this, in addition to using these characters, is he notes a massive earthquake in Lisbon, which comes up in the content in Candide. And, it creates a horrific natural disaster. And throughout the work of Candide, Voltaire refers to these like horrific situations that are so over the top, ridiculous, and horrific that nobody could come out of these unscathed, or saying that the world is just fine, but yet everybody does. And so he kind of critiques that mindset, and really kind of spins reality in a very, very different way, and criticizes some of the reactions of authority groups that seem to have no kind of basically are tone deaf, to what life is really like for most people. He has a phrase that sometimes talks about cultivating a garden. How is it that you can kind of cope within this space that's so realistic and challenging, and sometimes pessimistic? How do you kind of cope as an individual? So Voltaire is a very, very interesting personality for our purposes, somebody who really is in favor of freedom of expression, very much against the idea of censorship, feels that individual right to express oneself is very, very key, but he also, and this came up with the Voltaire group, he is very critical of democracy. He maybe leans more toward a leader who has essentially an enlightened, person who's like some degree of a philosopher king. Okay, so, one of his quotes, the individual who persecutes another because he is not of the same opinion is nothing less than a monster. He has a lot of quotes in particular about freedom of speech and about religious tolerance. Human behavior for Montesquieu is very interesting. He kind of gets into something known as climate theory, which stems from classical times, but is like kind of popular amongst some thinkers in the 1700s. The idea is that human behavior is somewhat dependent on climate. So people in very cold or very hot climates could be at a disadvantage. Geography really kind of shares a lot of its, kind of effects with human institutions. He does highlight the superiority of the English system, and he's French, and he talks a lot about the system of checks and balances over the branches of government. And so he likely expands this point of view to something that, England isn't quite as, diffused in power, just like the United States isn't either, even though we have three branches of government, we all might, roll our eyes in some ways at, we know that there are expressions of corporate power or whatever, and lobbyists and all kinds of things that really exist. Montesquieu kind of creates almost like the theoretical idea behind separating the branches of government and having the concept of a check on an absolute ruler. And of course, he's really speaking about the government of France. Rousseau, who I think is one of the more challenging individuals to understand, he really is suggesting at the end of the Enlightenment, he kind of is critiquing some of the place or status where people are. He's kind of moving away from this dial of like liberalism. He kind of is suggesting that civilizations, the more they progress, do they become more moral? And he suggests no, that it's exactly the opposite. Civilization over time is kind of corrupting itself, and ultimately there becomes a, kind of a individual kind of response of selfishness, of resentment, of jealousy, and some of these things like take down a society. So the social contract that exists in Rousseau's realm of things has to kind of enable people to be their best selves in a kind of communal situation. And he describes the concept of the general will. To some degree, we can look at the general will as kind of what people in the society mostly want. And when there's disagreement, perhaps we know that one way of kind of targeting what people in the society want is like majority rule. Although in the Rousseau version of things, it's not necessarily the case that there's always a vote. He really believes that society's members will come to understanding the general will because they will ultimately be sure that they will be making decisions on behalf of the best of society. So they agree, in a sense, to move away from their individual passions and move into kind of a belief in the concept of the general will. So even a minority group that is able to express the general will could essentially be followed, and people, because there's a social contract to follow the general will, there is a belief that regardless of what happens, this is a direct democracy of sorts, and one must follow the general will. And so, there is a lot of questions in Rousseau's, writings that focus on the concept of the general will and how ultimately people are ready for that concept, how they'll get to the general will, and how a society will operate once kind of involved in aligning with the general will. So here's a quote from Rousseau: "The English people believe itself to be free, but it is mistaken." So very much disagrees with Montesquieu. It is only free during election of members of parliament. As soon as members are elected, the people are enslaved. It is nothing. In the brief moment of its freedom, the English people make such a use of that freedom that it deserves to lose it. So it's, this election of representatives is something, way too small for what Rousseau sees people's freedom as capable of. Okay. Lastly, and you may not have this on your DBQ sheet, but just to kind of put this in there, because there's many people who participate in this project of Diderot. Part of the Enlightenment projects are these ideas of an encyclopedia, which is maybe less about an encyclopedia in terms of explanation of particular topics, but there are many solicited articles from a variety of different experts, and it serves as a space for people to offer critique and discussion of ideas. Much of what's happening in the Enlightenment is kind of this formation of what today would be called public opinion. We might look in newspapers or social media sites or a variety of things to get a read on public opinion. In the day of the Enlightenment, salons, coffee shops, even like in salons, women would sometimes offer their homes and host a group of men, usually, to communicate in a salon. And sometimes the woman host would ask questions. So it kind of made people accountable to defend some of their ideas. Some of that, like, kind of natural debate and conversation was heralded in the time of the Enlightenment. And this is also happening in a public media space. So writings where people are sharing some of their ideas and their critiques. So very much a space and time of words being shared. Last slide. This is Adam Smith, and we didn't really get to talk about Smith that much in class, so we'll note a little bit about Smith here. Adam Smith is Scottish, so like with David Hume, for example, he often gets heralded as a liberal thinker in the realm of economics. Partially, one of the things that Adam Smith is interested in is pushing back, not necessarily against absolutism, but against the relationship of people with their economy. And he especially talks about mercantilism, this idea that countries get rich because their treasuries get bigger when they export, and they use colonies in an effort to expand, their wealth. He kind of goes against some of that and suggests the wealth of nations really comes from someplace else. And he dialogues about a system that today we would recognize as an economic market, where suppliers and consumers kind of gather in certain spaces and using prices, basically discuss, how much of something should be produced. So, in Smith's world, people don't have a lot of material goods, and the quality of life, is stinky. So he's thinking markets are the best way to make a society wealthy, because the typical person is going to benefit from this wealth. It doesn't only go to like the treasury and make the government really rich. Markets can enable everybody to expand the wealth of the nation. And he is notable for suggesting that markets are to be followed, and that people generally are selfish. He kind of agrees with that understanding of human nature. And he says, because people are selfish, we should look out for ourselves. And when we do, there is like an invisible hand that kind of enables the market, because I'm looking out for me and you're looking out for you. Everybody is working to get like their best, kind of quality of life, or their best product, or their best job, or whatever it is in the economy. And ultimately, everybody trying to do that together creates a lot of, kind of pressure on the system. And we get equilibrium, where we don't get abuse because there's too many people making decisions at the same time. Because of competition, essentially, consumers are going to get a low price. And because of competition, producers are always going to get a high price. And so he kind of advocates for what becomes known as liberal economic systems. Okay, so be well. I hope that helped, just to give you the range of ideas ideas, dig into the texts and dig into your DBQ. And tomorrow, of course, we'll answer any questions that you have.